This is Zorian Rotenberg at A-Team Software. This is not about our company or software. This is truly a very educational and edifying webinar. And here today we have a great expert and CEO coach and someone who's actually built two highly successful companies to $100 million in sales. Bob Norton, he runs a airtight management and C-level enterprises. Bob is a real world-class expert on strategy and strategic planning, one of the best in the business, and I think you'll learn quite a lot today. And Bob, just so that I can leave it in your hands to give your background, please go ahead and join us and tell us more.
Sure. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Bob Norton, CEO at Airtight Management. I've done a couple hundred strategic plans in the last decade. Was a serial entrepreneur for 14 years, growing startups and middle-sized companies, and also worked for two Fortune 500 companies. I was one of the founders of what's today International, was it International Thompson, is now today Thomson Reuters. And various other companies. I started as a technologist, so have pretty deep technical knowledge too. But essentially for the last 12 years, I've worked as an advisor and coach to CEOs, creating strategic plans and installing the systems needed to scale businesses. Airtight Management is a 6-module system that drops in as companies grow. And today we're really just going to talk about the very most basic tools of strategic planning. A good strategic planner is going to have about 30 or 40 tools in their box. I created the Airtight Management Strategic Planning Kit, and it comes with a disk of over 100 tools and models and slides and concepts that help you kind of tease apart your business and strategy and inject more competitive advantage and sustainable differentiation in the business. And I always say, I also created the CEO Bootcamp, and I always say differentiation is the biggest and most important word in starting a strategy or a strategic plan. Zorian, I'm paging and it's moving a little slow. Okay, I guess it's starting, but it's a little slow. So today's agenda is really to go through the top 5 tools here and be able to look at those briefly. We couldn't fit everything in here that we would like to fit given the limits on time. And so what we have done is also provide a bonus material thing that you can get by email, which will provide some additional tools and some more detail. So we're going to talk about what is strategic planning. The 5 tools we're going to look at today are the basic SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. A model for differentiation, Michael Porter's competitive landscape maps, or CLMs. I hope most of you have read the book by Jim Collins, called Good to Great. That talks about the hedgehog concept, or what a lot of people call the core of your business. And also a tool I created and sometimes lecture at in MBA programs at universities called the Risk Landscape Map. And now most of these tools are just a different way to look at your business, a different dimension to poke and prod at the business model and find ways to improve it. And then we'll briefly talk about a 1-page strategic plan, which is sort of a repository for all this information, so that you have a summary and can distill it down and reference that during the year and quarterly updates. And as I said, you'll get a bonus if you email me at this email address. I will send you by tomorrow this deck of slides, if you'd like, as well as some bonus materials that we put together that we couldn't fit in today's presentation. So what is a strategy? It's really the long-term plan, and I've quantified that as 3 to 5 years here, to develop that superior protectable market position compared to competitors. A lot of people have a rough time thinking far out, and that's, if everyone did it, then it would be easy, right? Or if it was easy, everyone would do it rather. So you've got to spend a lot of time, and a lot of my time CEO coaching is spent stretching the time horizon that people think about to plan and get ahead of it. And a famous quote around this, is Wayne Gretzky's quote that when he was asked why he's a better hockey player than everyone else, he said, because I go where the puck will be and everyone else goes where the puck is. And that's become a very famous business saying as well. You don't want to run your business based on today's headline and the situation today. You'd like to run your business on what the future will look like, knowing the trends and what's highly probable of happening in the future. So what is the value of a strategic plan? Number one is you collaborate and you get your management team aligned in learning from each other and supporting each other. Number two is there's education happening there, because the multidisciplines that are happening between marketing, sales, finance, product development, operations, they're sharing and supporting each other and finding out what there might be in terms of bottlenecks to align and coordinate. The third value of the strategic planning process is obviously communications. It creates bonds and links between the appropriate people to communicate, which will improve the culture and allow people to ask for help and tap each other's experience. And number four, and people focus on this, and I don't think they should, is the written plan itself. The reality is that not too many people will read and understand that plan, and it's the output of the process, but it's not necessarily the most valuable thing. In fact, I would argue it's only about 15% of the value, and 85% is really coming from that 1, 2, and 3 above, that's aligning your team and building the bonds and making communications flow easily. So the process is very valuable and more valuable than the document itself. So the results of a good strategic plan are you're going to generate higher profit margins. Because of that differentiation, you won't compete on price as much. Your product is less likely to be commoditized and cloned over time. So you're going to have more sustainable and more predictable revenues. You're going to wind up with faster growth and lower marketing and sales costs, because you won't be in bake-offs and competitions with similar products as often. And of course, those higher margins allow you to finance some growth with less external financing. You're going to get cooperation. When you're differentiated, distributors and distribution channels will not view you as a competitor. They will view you as a partner and synergistic potentially with their own products. And so you're going to see more cooperation from distribution channels. And you'll see an increasing ability to attract and retain the best people, because there's a growth there. And of course, attracting and retaining the best people is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy of success. If you have the best people, they're going to execute better, they're going to come up with better strategic plans, and your company is generally just going to be more successful. Also, word of mouth referrals, higher closing rates, and more repeat business is going to come from that differentiation. The famous book on that is Purple Cow, with the simple example that if you saw a purple cow, driving down the street, you're probably going to tell someone. And so generating word of mouth is also a huge benefit of good differentiation. So let's go on to the next slide here. So the 4 main generic strategies are premium, world beater, death zone, and commodity. And that's just creating a quadrant that shows the level of differentiation and your cost of production. So this is a one-dimensional view that's generic across all industries. And by the way, most of these tools work in any industry. It doesn't matter what industry you've got. Obviously, everyone would love to be in the top right and be a world beater, because they have extremely high differentiation and also have lower cost of production because of whatever trade secrets and manufacturing and other things that they build internally that competitors don't have. If you're the opposite and obviously have high cost of production and low differentiation, you're probably dying slowly or will be dead very soon. Premium positions, and we'll show some examples of this on competitive landscape maps shortly, obviously charge higher margins and typically provide a better service. But of course, the higher the differentiation, the more you're going to see the ability to control your margins and get better prices that fund your growth and some profit margins. So it's true that services can often be differentiated by geography, but that's not the position most companies want to be in, especially with most marketing now happening online and on the internet. But certainly local services can survive based on that, even though they may have sort of a commodity product or service. But they also have less predictability and margin. And you're basically in the business of training competitors in service businesses sometimes if you're offering a commodity service. So if you think about real estate brokers and mechanics, doctors, essentially your investment in employees is setting up future competitors in the same geographic market where you're operating, which is obviously not a great position to be in long term. So you don't want to train your competitors, obviously. So good strategy requires all of these things. I already went in the Wayne Gretzky quote. It requires a differentiation so that competitors, you're not a commodity product and in bidding wars with people with a race to the bottom in price. It requires a deep understanding of the customer's needs and desires. And of course, it's a very integral part of the strategic planning process to do both in-depth market research and competitive intelligence. You have to understand the space you're working in very well. And the third part is kind of a vision of the future or that trajectory. Where is the market going to be in the future? Are you building products a year or 2 years in advance of an expected need? Lots of people have gotten rich doing that and being a year or two ahead of the market, which of course is where capital wants to flow to people that are ahead of the market and are going to create and maintain some competitive advantage, or as venture capitalists like to call it, an unfair competitive advantage through proprietary patents or whatever. So another way to look at this just briefly is the best business models. If you look at this list of 22 companies, you'll see pretty much all 22 of these have all 4 of these elements in their business model. So this is, another way to look at a business. You've got to have the differentiation. You've got to have a targeted niche where you can be the small or medium-sized fish in a pond, not an ocean. You want strong messaging. Sometimes the difference between success and failure is just getting your message across well to the customer. And we as CEOs tend to be way too close to our own products and sometimes needs outside help from people that are closer to the customer and have not been drinking the Kool-Aid, as they say, as long to come up with that messaging. But of course, in marketing, you're always doing A/B testing and trying to find the best messaging. And of course, superior execution, as Peter Drucker is claimed to have said, execution and culture will eat strategy for lunch. So if you don't have good execution systems, and we're going to talk about that a little later today, the best strategy in the world will fail unless you can align your people and have the discipline to execute on that very well. And typically you need execution systems with well-defined processes for marketing, sales, delivery to the customer or operations, whatever you want to call it, customer service. You need systems to attract and train and keep the best people. And you need a certain element of creativity and innovation to grow. So strategic planning tool 1 of the 5 we're going to do is the SWOT analysis. And everyone has probably heard of this. In fact, it's the first thing I do when I go into a new client is I tell all of the senior managers to take a blank piece of paper, off the copier, divide it into 4 quadrants, and write out the strengths of their organization, the weaknesses of the organization, the opportunities and the threats. And I do that individually without collaboration first, because that allows me to assess the level of thinking of the management team. You know, and individual contributors will worry about the flavor of coffee in the cafeteria. And obviously more senior people are thinking that, hey, this competitor is moving in our direction, you know, and they have these advantages, and you know, that's a threat that we've got to recognize and do something to adjust to as well. So this is the, you know, the very most basic, and you know, lots of people know this. It is a good exercise to go through, but it's kind of the kindergarten of strategic planning tools. You know, but having this as a reference and having your management team understand, especially the opportunities and threats that drive your goals and your strategic priorities in the coming year, 2 years, or 3 years, you know, it's very important to kind of distill that down and have it there for reference. So here's a sample, and I'm not going to read all of this, obviously, in the interest of time, but I wanted to give you in the slides, you know, the kind of the level of thinking that might happen in a good SWOT analysis. You can obviously limit this to 4 or 5 top things. You do want to stay away from the generic threats. In other words, it's always a threat that, you know, the CEO is going to get hit by a bus, or the VP of marketing is going to leave. And typically, those are just regular things you have to deal with as a company, and they wouldn't appear here because they're sort of generic threats to everybody. So you're really looking at the ones that are very specific in your market space. Now, I like to differentiate between 2 philosophies of generating, you know, or entering a disruptive strategy versus more incremental strategy. And both of these statements, you know, coming from Ford and Steve Jobs, are very true, but they're only true if you're disrupting a market. Most companies are doing incremental innovation, and they're adding smaller new features. They're not creating the iPhone that's going to change the world. So, you know, this is a good reason to ignore market research and what competitors are saying, but only because you're so far ahead. You're disrupting a market, and the average customer can't envision or conceptualize that great leap. If you use this to say market research is useless, you probably will fail, because you will be ignoring important feedback from the market and the space and the customers as well. So disruptive innovation is rarely going to come from the customer as an idea. It can be technology enabled, like the iPhone. It can be a shift in the space and government regulations, or all kinds of things that create disruptive opportunities. But the customer is not typically going to have that idea and be aware of it. So you've got to differentiate between these 2 very important bifurcations, if you will, of strategy. Strategic planning tool 2 is an extrapolation of the 4 generic strategies into a much more useful matrix. Now, I created this myself, but lots of consultants think this way. But this particular diagram is created to show the commodity through breakthrough spectrum. Of course, that's in some ways differentiation on that bottom line as well. And the vertical line is your protectability. Now, services are not very protectable. Relationships can be replaced with better pricing, or, you know, people changing in the organization. Again, they're not protectable on their own. But when you start to combine these and you create hybrid product and services, you are driving up the protectability of the business and the differentiation. So the idea is to place, you know, yourself on this, and where you are today in terms of the competitiveness and differentiation. And do you have a product, a service, a relationship, or do you have all of those 3 things working for you? And ask yourself, how is our business going to be pulled up and to the right? What can we do to inject more service in our product, or more product in our service? What can we do like evergreen contracts that automatically renew, and SaaS software where people get addicted to your product and it's part of their daily workflow? So these hybrids of product and service are much harder to replicate, much harder to execute, but over time you can layer these things in to add more differentiation to your business. So ask yourself, where can you inject service in product or product in service? Here's a differentiation checklist. I don't want to spend the time to read all of this, but if you go through this individually afterwards, thinking about your own business, these are all powerful ways to add differentiation to your business, which will help you protect your margins, put up barriers to entry around your business, attract capital, and all kinds of other things. And I've put in some sample companies that are using these particular things, but there's no reason you can't use multiple of these. And in fact, strong businesses typically are using, 2 or 3 or 4 of these differentiation capabilities to stand out in the market, and then of course have messaging that communicates that uniqueness, what's called a unique selling proposition. And sometimes that's a very emotional thing, and sometimes it's a logical thing, but people buy on emotion almost 100% of the time, no matter what they tell you. At the end of the day, if you keep asking why did they buy, so sooner or later they're going to use the word feel and how they felt about it, whether they felt safe with that decision or that it was higher quality or whatever is infused into the brand. So think about which ones you can use as a checklist in your strategic planning process. And that's sort of a subset of tool 2 to drive more differentiation. Visual planning tools. This was invented by Michael Porter, who most call the father of competitive strategy. He wrote the book Competitive Advantage in the 80s. And runs a consultancy. Now, he's mostly focused on very large industries and Fortune 1000 or 2000 kinds of companies, but the concepts are all applicable even to medium and small sized businesses. And so here's what your basic competitive landscape map looks like. And there might be 6 or 10 different competitive landscape maps that you could put together for a given business. This is the typical one that has the quality and the price as the main differentiators. Here's another sample, and this looks at the spectrum of conservative to sporty of car brands. And then on the vertical axis is practical and working up to classy and distinctive. So again, it's just another way to look at the marketplace, look for white space that is not occupied today, and say, how can we put a product or a service into that white space, given the way the market is structured today competitively. Now, there are many other ways. I'm just going to flip through a couple more sophisticated examples of competitive landscape maps in a minute, but here's the checklist of how you do them. You list the dimensions that your customers can recognize in your product or service, or hybrid product and service, right? And you list all the things that they can see. You then put these up, but I shouldn't say, I'm sorry, there's a typo there. It shouldn't say paid these together. It should say put these together in ways that make sense. In other words, you pair them. It's really, the D is supposed to be an R. You pair them because we want to put them on a 2-dimensional paper and look at it that way. And then essentially you gather the competitive intelligence of what's happening in the market. In a good strategic planning process, you're probably going to create at least 3 to 5 of these, but some businesses could potentially have, 6 to 10 if they were very sophisticated and complex or crowded markets. And what I learned and what we did in our exercises in the CEO boot camp when we built these is we put them on see-through acetate. And that way, when you were done with them, you could overlay them and you could identify spaces where there was white space across the vertical dimension going through several of these competitive landscape maps. And that would definitely define products that were differentiated on 3 separate dimensions or 6 separate recognizable variables that you could look at in terms of new product development and steering your existing products. So I'll look at a couple more complex ones to show you how complicated this can get. This is one I did. I was an interim CEO brought in by a venture capital firm to do a restart. It was actually 2001, just before 9/11 happened. And this is a competitive landscape map of the content management space in 2000 and 2010. And this adds another concept that I wanted to show you. Obviously, the dimensions here are, you know, how out of the box the product or solution is. And on the bottom is actually the life cycle. So a slightly different take on differentiation in that spectrum, the life cycle of data, and who at that time was doing those things in the marketplace. And our product was kind of a digital Federal Express that zipped data up and shipped it out to content management systems for big companies and manufacturers and Fidelity and people like that. But the new concept introduced in this example is that red arrow. What direction, based on competitive intelligence, and by that I mean things like who are they hiring? What direction is that company moving? Are they moving upscale? Are they adding, in this dimension, additional services to the data life cycle as data is gathered, created, and distributed? So that's another concept, is what direction are your main competitors moving in? And another example, I mean, this is obviously a little bit mind-blowing, and only people in the space would recognize all of the competitors. But this is another way to make sure that your staff, your product development staff, and your marketing and your salespeople all understand who your competitors are in the space, and how to deal with differentiation and objections and other things. So this one was published obviously by Harbor Research, as it says, in 2005. And this is what you see from Forrester and some of the other market research and evaluation companies, because they're looking at a higher level of who's close to each other in the market space. And of course, you don't want to be close to anyone. You want a lot of white space around your business for differentiation. Strategic planning tool number 4 is what I call the vision pie. Now, I have a long article, and I'm happy to send this to people. It's about 14 pages that talks about how to make a complete vision, and it's called the 11 elements of a successful vision. The core idea here is essentially what Jim Collins calls the hedgehog concept. It's what you're investing in that you know you can monetize in many different ways over time, and what you're trying to become the best at the world at. The outer ring is your tactical things, and the inner ring is your strategy. And of course, every discipline in your business, sales, marketing, product development, operations, finance, they all have strategies, and there's ways to differentiate and create huge success, as Lee Iacocca did by inventing financing of cars back at Chrysler. That was a financing strategy that made all the difference in the growth of Chrysler. So don't think about innovation and vision and how that's changing over time as just about product, because you can innovate and differentiate in any of these areas or sectors of the business, you know, including distribution, you know, and other things. So the vision pie is kind of a way to look at your business, and it's a good checklist to make sure that your strategic plan is complete and you're optimizing each of the strategies in each area of your business. You can create huge competitive differentiation and advantage in any one of these slices of the pie. And it's always better to be able to have multiple points of differentiation, which will help target a better market for you. So I'm happy, as I said, I've got about a 14-page article on this that goes into it in depth. I'm happy to send that to people. Again, it's another way of looking at your business and asking, how can we improve our differentiation? Now, risk management is always an important thing. If I'm doing due diligence for a venture capitalist, this is one of the first things I'll do in a business is assess the risks, which risks are in control of the company and which risks are out of their control is the key here. So this creates two dimensions on a space, and we tend to think in three dimensions because we live in a three-dimensional world, but we can only put these things on two-dimensional paper usually, and communicating it that way is very important. So the idea here is to look at all the risks in your business and place them on the spectrum from controllable to uncontrollable. So the risks in the top right are risks that could kill your company that you have no control over. That's a business you don't want to invest in. If you've got multiple or even one big risk in that top right, you've got to change your business model. You've got to ask, how do we get rid of that risk, or how do we manage that risk and pull that down? And so what I do is put risk bubbles that are showing a third dimension of the size. So here's an example of a completed risk map. And each of those has in it a probability of that happening. Now, of course, that's a subjective judgment, but it helps you and your team be aware of how much effort you have to put into to manage that risk. And so if I put together a risk map for this company in a due diligence process as an angel investor, or for a corporate acquisition or merger or a venture capital investment, this would be one of the first things that you would want to look at. And the more your risks are down and to the left, where you can make them happen instead of having, that being out of your control, the better your chances of success as a business. But the point is, you can tweak your business model. If the biggest risk in this is the customer does not see the product value, there are many things you can do with your customer service and your communications program and your brand and your marketing to try to pull that bubble down and to the right. So ask yourself, how do you put each of those bubbles, make them smaller and move them to the right? So those are the 5 tools today, and all of them really start from the philosophy of start with the end in mind. What is your vision in the future of what the market space will look like? And how are you going to build something to get there and be a market leader instead of a market follower? This is what activates. The RAS stands for the reticular activating system, which goes into some deep psychology and neuroscience of the brain. But it basically, to put it in short terms, the brain finds and looks for and manifests what you program it to look for. And so part of the strategic planning process is essentially programming your management team to look for opportunities and understand how that's going. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Zorian, and he's going to talk more about the repository for the strategic plan and OKRs, key objectives and results, and I'm sorry, objectives and key results. And feel free to contact me about some of these tools. We offer, obviously, facilitation of strategic planning, as well as training of the team in planning and doing the plans themselves. This is a very brief flyover on 5 of the simple tools, but there are at least 35 tools that professional strategic planners use. So do you want to open it up for a real quick? I mean, we're a little late on time, Zorian. Do you want to put all of the Q&A at the end, or do you want to ask a few questions now?
Actually, I think it's a great idea to have some folks see if they want to ask questions now. Do you see, Bob, actually, if people ask questions, and I can read them to you, although it is hard to, I see there are a couple of questions here. People are asking, could you send me a copy of the presentation? The answer was yes. Please email
Yes.
Bob.
What you need to do is send an email to B as in Bob, Norton, Norton, at airtight, AIRTIGHT, MGT.com. And I will send a PDF file with all the slides. And I'll also send you the bonus materials, which I think is another 20 pages of information on strategic planning, and also mention if you want the vision article as well.
Perfect. I don't see any other questions in the question um, list over here. So if there are any, of course, please feel free to email Bob directly. At the end, we'll also post our email addresses once again in a couple of minutes here when we finish up. So with that in mind, Bob, thank you so much. That was super interesting. I'm sure everyone is learning a ton from this. And of course, I'll say that, I've known Bob for many, many years. Bob, I guess it's probably like 10 right now or 9 or something, right? Comes
Yeah,
close to
sounds
that.
about right.
Bob was my strategic CEO coach, I think at least once or twice, and it's been always extremely, extremely useful to have that very sophisticated, deep external perspective and coaching and help. Helped a ton, so I highly recommend for anyone with any questions to connect with Bob. And then now let's take that strategic uh, theme and then apply it to actually execution. And you can actually do that through OKRs with alignment. So let me do another very brief summary, of how that's done. And for any further depth, we can always talk offline. So you must have heard this quote a lot before. I think all the audience here is executives or folks who have or very familiar with running a business or being an executive at a successful company. So vision without execution is hallucination. So having a strategy and not being able to execute on it is very dangerous. And in fact, there's actually a statistic from Harvard by Robert Kaplan and David Norton, the two professors who actually invented uh, balanced scorecards. And just like Michael Porter, also at Harvard, they go around and just advise, the Fortune 1,000 companies pretty much exclusively. But the statistic is that 95% of the employees of any typical company actually don't fully understand the company's strategy or the company's objectives or goals, or even what's expected of them themselves to help the company achieve those goals. And this is very common, and this is very bad, right? So, whatever size company you're at, the 5% that actually do know the strategy and the goals are the executive team, right? And that's really unfortunate. So, how do you fix that? Well, I'll give you some pointers here, and I think this is actually very fixable, and it's fixable with objectives and key results. And I'll tell you about that in a second. But first, you obviously start out with strategic planning, and through that process that Bob, a lot of times Bob Norton is actually a Sherpa, if that's the right way to call you, Bob, for a process like that for the executive team and the CEO to go through a strategic planning process
I've been
correctly.
called worse.
Was that?
I said I've been called worse than Sherpa. That's a good one. Yeah.
You help walk people through that and climb that Mount Everest, right, with some real help. But you ultimately come out of the strategic planning process with a couple of things, including what are your strategic priorities, at least for this year, right? And and a lot of times your strategic priorities don't really change much from quarter to quarter and not even from year to year. They may change in 5 years, but a lot of times you'll come out with 3 to 5 top priorities. And this image here is right from the balanced scorecard white paper, which is shown as source over here. And then if you look at this slide over here, how do you connect your strategic priorities, your strategic pillars? How do you connect them to your execution? Well, it's by creating objectives and key results at corporate level, top company level. Then you can cascade that down through department level, business unit level, team level, and even individual objectives and key results. And OKRs. And by the way, we can do another webinar with Bob actually diving deeper into OKRs. But think of OKRs are just as objectives. In fact, Bob has a system called Bob. Is it PAMS, right?
Yeah, performance, accountability, and merit system, of which OKRs is a piece, but it's a lot of other best practices in management science as well.
So, but I would love for people to just think of OKRs simply as objectives, right? the acronym shouldn't scare you. Yes, it was made popular by Google, but it really just means objectives. You can call them MBOs, management by objectives. The MBOs and OKRs are very, very similar. There's not a significant difference. The point is just setting objectives that connect to the corporate strategy, and you can cascade them down effectively. So that's how OKRs connect your strategy directly to the clear, measurable objectives for all the business units, teams, and even individuals. And then you can track them and track their progress regularly. So, for example, the snapshot at the bottom is right out of our own product, the A-Team OKR and performance management platform, where you can set up objectives, right? Then you can take these objectives, they connect to the corporate strategy or strategic priorities, and then you can cascade. This is part of the alignment chart, which I'll show you on the next screen. And these top corporate objectives, the four of them over here, and you can have five or you can have three, you can cascade them further. And every time you click on any one of these cards, you'll be able to see how it cascades down, right? And it's all interconnected. And this is what basically it looks like, right? So if you have, and this is a demo set, right? But this is actually not a corporate org chart, right? It's not about people. This is actually an equivalent of an org chart, but for objectives. So basically, it doesn't mean that this is in the strict vertical hierarchy of the organization, because you can have cross-functional objectives that basically connect one department's objective to another department, such as aligning sales and marketing, for example, or product and marketing, or product and sales, right? When you need a new product that you're planning on selling, and that's why you're adding more sales reps in Q3 to start selling that new product, right? You can have that cross alignment. And this is we call it a visual goal alignment hierarchy, where you can connect different objectives. And what's interesting, anytime any sub-objective, right, is making progress, if you're going from red, to yellow to green, it actually compounds or impacts the progress of the objective to which it aligns up or contributes up to, right? So it's mathematically interconnected. It's pretty amazing how you can connect all of these objectives. And remember from the prior slides, we've taken strategic priority, created a top corporate OKR around that priority, and then cascaded it down. So now when people are executing, they know directly how they're connected to a top company strategic priority, how they're impacting that, how their work effort connects directly to what really matters to the company. It's extremely powerful stuff. And through these dashboards, you can see how you're executing the company's strategy. So your strategy and your vision is actually connected to execution and is no longer that hallucination that Edison was quoted on. This other piece actually, so Bob talked a lot about strategic frameworks, and ultimately, when you go through a strategic planning process, you come out with a summary strategic plan, right? A lot of people refer to it as the one-page strategic plan. Actually, Bob has his own version that he can send you. But if you want to have that in a software platform that people can see all the time and communicate to them your mission, your 10-year vision statement, right? Or sometimes referred as the big BHAG, that's the Jim Collins big hairy audacious goal, your core values, your top strategic priorities, your core competencies. If you want everyone to be on the same page and know this at all times, we have that right in our software product. We can actually show you a demo. We call it the TOPS, the one-page strategy, right? Where all of these key concepts, basically the final outcome of your strategic planning process, you can summarize it so people can see it very easily and truly understand it, so that your people are not part of that 95% that we saw earlier as a statistic, a pretty morbid statistic from Harvard. So, and by the way, one of the things we have also is over here, you can actually send praise and feedback to folks at your company. Their managers can, or anyone else at the company can to others. When someone exemplifies one of the core values of your company, you can send that and praise people for that. It's amazing how people feel connected to actually embodying the things that are really important to the company. Furthermore, in connecting your strategy to execution, your executive team and management team meetings, and even team meetings between or meetings, one-on-one meetings between a manager and a direct report. Why don't they typically start with discussing the objectives of either the employee or the different teams? Why are so many meetings pretty vacuous, right? Why don't we start them with objectives? Here are the 3 to 5 objectives that we have. Here's how we're measuring, and start a meeting with, how is the progress on these objectives or goals, right? Or OKRs. By the way, I use all of this synonymously. Are we on track overall? What are we proud of achieving so far, right? Sort of maintaining that momentum, and asking the question that's written about in the book by another Harvard professor, Teresa Amiable, called The Progress Principle, subtitled the Power of Small Wins. So when you can actually measure progress in the objectives, you can actually catch people doing something right, celebrate those small wins. And again, there's a whole book written about it, how that's an incredibly uh, competitive tool, very competitive tool for your company to actually recognize the small wins and celebrate them. But you need to have objectives in the first place so that it's not in vacuum, but measurable. And then, furthermore, when you have objectives in place and you're measuring them regularly, you're connecting your strategy to execution, not just through, again, vacuous or high level, amorphous, and fluffy conversations, but actually by having measurable objectives in place and dashboards where you can identify problem areas early so that you are in fact executing on your strategy and you're not a quarter or several quarters too late to figuring out that you're way behind achieving your strategic priorities, right? So then you can regularly ask, and by the way, our software automates the notifications, letting you know through the dashboards when something is really behind. There's something called the at-risk report that shows any objectives that are behind. Um, and you can understand where you're stuck, where the bottlenecks and obstacles are. And you can actually configure in our product to do a what's called a weekly check-in. It takes like 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, to update your objectives and write comments and get feedback from your manager. And every manager uses that to get real tight alignment with all the employees for just a couple of minutes in a 5-day work week, and really for everyone to be truly aligned on the same page, see how their own objectives are connecting to what really matters to the company, to the top corporate OKRs, and do it measurably in a data-driven manner. So, this is not a webinar to dive deep into OKRs. We have a couple of the other ones where we talk about the definitions of OKRs, the best practices of OKRs, how to create alignment through 3 different alignment approaches, from basic loose alignment to tight alignment that really contributes measurable progress to whatever it is aligned to or connected to. But these are all the companies that use OKRs globally. Google, and here's some more. Google made OKRs really popular, and I think it's a global phenomenon. Everybody wants to do OKRs. But the one thing I will tell you is that, truth be told, OKRs, just think of them simply as setting objectives. Don't fly by the seat of your pants. Don't manage people in a vacuum, right? Don't just manage them with tasks, because that automatically becomes kind of drives things to micromanagement. But if you set clear objectives, you can measure them. You can manage people in a data-driven manner, objectively, not subjectively. All your managers at your company will be much more effective as managers, having such objectives in place and connecting everything and aligning everything all the way up to what matters to the company, and all the way connecting them to strategic pillars or priorities, which again come out of a strategic planning process that Bob has touched upon. So with that said, you can get a free demo, live demo of our product. We can also, during the demo, talk about OKRs and answer your questions, even about high level sort of strategic concepts about OKRs and alignment, show you how alignment and visual alignment hierarchy works. Just email us at cdemo@ateam.com, ATIIM. Bob and I will offer you a free strategy session and assessment for your business. Just literally, if you sign up for this live demo, you will automatically get that and get to speak to Bob directly. get to speak to me about OKRs and setting them up and implementing. All of that is free. It's pretty valuable, as you can see, what based on the conversations here. And again, see demo at ateam.com. And then if you have any other questions, please email Bob at bnorton at airtightmanagementmgt.com or myself, Zorian, at ateam.com, or email us for a live demo. And we will be happy to answer your questions and help. Bob, is there anything else we should add here before we
Well, yeah,
go?
I just wanted to connect the two segments here in people's minds, and to say that I'd say that the strategic planning process is a discipline to create collaboration, communications, visibility, and accountability. And it's in designing where you want to be in the future based on trends and markets and your belief of the future. The OKR process is a discipline for collaboration, communication, visibility, and accountability also, but more on the day-to-day, month-to-month basis to stay aligned with those larger strategic objectives that you designed. So both of these are very powerful, and there's research out there that shows that OKRs increase value creation in corporations 56%. And if you think of Ben Franklin's old, how do you get rich compounding money 5% over time, think about what 56% compounding over time does to your business's value in the marketplace. So these things are the difference between the big winners in the market and the also ran companies, and doing them well really is the difference between huge success and momentum and just being another company out there.
Totally, I agree. In fact, I'd say Google has used OKRs and very good strategic planning best practices. So if anyone wants to be like Google, if you care to be, definitely want to consider an effective strategic planning process and setting objectives to align everyone. So with that said, Bob, thank you so much for joining us. As always, super interesting and very valuable. I hope that folks who are interested in learning more will contact us, and we can help. And we can both jump on a